The morning air in Edo was soft with the fragrance of cherry blossoms, their delicate petals drifting like pale pink snowflakes over the cobbled streets, where the rhythmic clatter of geta sandals echoed faintly in the distance. The retired samurai, now a keeper of quiet rituals, knelt upon the sun-warmed tatami of his tea house, the mats releasing a whisper of clean, dry grass as he adjusted his posture. His hands, once calloused from the grip of a sword, now moved with deliberate grace, smoothing the folds of his dark blue kimono as he laid out the tea utensils. The scent of freshly ground matcha curled through the air, bitter and earthy, mingling with the faint incense of sandalwood lingering from yesterday's ceremony. Outside, a breeze stirred the blossoms, their fleeting beauty a reminder of life's impermanence Mono no aware. And for a fleeting moment, he paused, fingertips brushing the polished edge of the lacquered tea caddy, its smooth surface cool beneath his touch. A memory flashed, steel hissing from a scabbard, the acrid smell of smoke clinging to bloodied fields, and his breath caught, just slightly, before he exhaled, pulling the present back into focus. The water in the iron kettle began its low, murmuring song, almost imperceptible, like the distant echo of footsteps on stone. And he measured the tea with practiced precision, the bamboo scoop trembling only once in his grasp. He wondered if his guests today would sense the shadow of the blade still lurking beneath his calm, the way the past clung like the faintest trace of salt on a wind-blown breeze. But here, in this room, the only battle was the one for presence, the precise angle of the whisk, the slow pour of water, the stillness between movements. The sunlight slanted through the paper screens, painting shifting patterns on the floor, each beam a silent witness to the dance of discipline and memory. He closed his eyes, inhaled. The ritual was his armor now, the tea his offering to the gods of peace, to the ghosts of the fallen, to the fragile blossom-strewn world beyond the door. Today, like every day, he would begin again, one breath at a time. The morning light filtered through the paper shoji screens, soft and golden, casting delicate shadows across the tatami mats that carried the faint, earthy scent of straw and the lingering aroma of green tea from yesterday's ceremony. The samurai no, the tea master now kneeled in seiza, his spine straight, his hands steady as they lifted the chowan, the ceramic bowl cool and smooth beneath his fingertips. The ritual of cleansing it was second nature, the cloth moving in practiced circles, the water clear and pure as it rinsed away unseen dust. Yet today, his fingers hesitated, just for a breath. The sound of the cloth against porcelain echoed oddly in his ears, too sharp, too close, like the whisper of a katana drawn from its sheath in the still air before dawn. His lungs tightened, suddenly recalling another morning, decades past, the metallic tang of blood in the air, the weight of his armor pressing into his shoulders, the way the mist had clung to the battlefield like a shroud. He exhaled slowly, the scent of fresh matcha earthy and bitter steadying him. The past was a ghost, but the tea ceremony demanded presence. His hands resumed their work, the rhythmic motions a silent prayer to discipline, to stillness. Outside, the wind brushed through the maple leaves in the garden, their rustling like the distant murmurs of fallen comrades. He lifted the chasin, the bamboo whisk, inspecting its delicate tines for flaws, each one a reminder of the fragility of order, of how easily things could unravel. The polished wood of the tea scoop caught the light as he measured the powder, the motion precise, deliberate. Yet beneath the calm, his heart pulsed with the old, familiar tension. The way the battlefield's chaos still hummed in his veins, the way the tea ceremony's serenity sometimes felt like a fragile dam holding back a torrent. A bird cried out beyond the garden wall, and for an instant he was back there, the clash of steel, the cries of men, the way the world had narrowed to the next breath, the next strike. But here now, the kettle's quiet hiss called him back. The steam rose in delicate curls, carrying the scent of iron and pine, of water boiled over a flame tended with care. He poured, the liquid dark and swirling, a tiny universe in the bowl. His hands did not shake. They never shook. Yet in the space between heartbeats, he wondered if the ghosts could taste the tea too, if they knew how hard he had fought for this peace, how it sometimes tasted like absence. The first sip was bitter, then sweet. The warmth spread through him, a slow, quiet victory. The tea house, the garden, the world beyond all of it held in this single, perfect moment. The past would always be there, a shadow at the edge of his vision. But here in the light, there was only the bowl, the breath, the ritual. And that, for now, was enough. The afternoon sun filtered through the bamboo screens, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the tatami mats, their crisp, grassy scent mingling with the earthy aroma of freshly ground matcha. The tea master knelt in perfect stillness, the quiet rhythm of his breath barely stirring the sleeves of his indigo kimono, the silk cool against his skin. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta echoed on the cobbled street, a reminder of the world moving on, always moving while within the tearoom. Time seemed suspended, every movement deliberate, every silence sacred. His hands, calloused from decades of grasping a sword now sheathed and shrouded in memory, trembled faintly as he lifted the chowan, the ceramic smooth beneath his fingers. The bowl bore the imperfections of its making, tiny ridges catching the light like scars. And for a moment, he saw not the tea, but the crimson streak of dawn on a battlefield long past, the metallic tang of blood sharp in his memory, as the whistle of arrows split the air. He exhaled, slow and measured, and the memory dissolved like steam rising from hot water. The student, a young man with eager eyes and unmarked hands, knelt at the threshold, bowing low, his enthusiasm a bright, brittle thing. The tea master's lips curved, though his smile did not reach the depths of his eyes, where the ghosts of fallen comrades still lingered. "Enter," he murmured, and the boy scrambled forward, his breath quick with anticipation, oblivious to the weight of the master's gaze. The way his fingers lingered a heartbeat too long on the bamboo whisk, as though it were a blade, the kettle hissed softly, a sound like wind through winter pines, or the whisper of a katana drawn in the dark. The master poured hot water into the bowl, watching the powder dissolve into emerald foam, the bitter scent rising like an offering to unseen gods. Here, in this ritual, there was order, each motion a prayer, each pause a reckoning. The student leaned in, too close, too soon, and the master's spine straightened instinctively, the old vigilance surging like a tide. But then the breeze shifted, carrying the fragrance of cherry blossoms from the garden, and he softened. The war was over. The tea was ready. "Observe," he said, offering the bowl with hands that no longer shook, and as their fingers brushed the young man's warm with life, his own etched with time the past and present folded into stillness, like petals settling on still water. Here, in the space between breaths, was the tranquility he sought, not the absence of memory, but the grace to hold it lightly, like steam curling toward the sky, transient and unburdened. The first sip was bittersweet, as all truths were. The student gasped at the intensity, and the tea master allowed himself a true smile this time, fleeting as spring. There was much the boy did not know of battle, of loss, of the cost of peace, but there was time. For now there was only the tea, the light, the quiet, and that was enough. The retired samurai knelt upon the tatami mat, the crisp scent of woven straw and the faint, earthy musk of aged timber wrapping around him like a familiar cloak. His hands, once calloused from the grip of a katana, now moved with deliberate grace, smoothing the folds of his kimono, adjusting the chowan before him, the porcelain cool against his fingertips. Outside, the morning air carried the whisper of cherry blossoms, their petals drifting past the shoji screens like the ghosts of fallen comrades. Inside, the quiet was sacred, broken only by the hiss of water warming in the iron kettle, the sound a distant echo of battles long past, of steel drawn in the dead of night, sharp and sudden as a breath held before the strike. He inhaled deeply, the fragrance of matcha rising bitter, green, alive an anchor to the present. Yet even now, the weight of his sword, though absent from his hip, pressed against his spirit. The tremor in his fingers as he lifted the bamboo scoop was not from age, but from the memory of bloodied fields, of moonlight glancing off armor, of the cries that still threaded through his dreams like unbreakable silk. The students before him watched in silence, unaware of the storm beneath his stillness. With each measured motion, the turn of the wrist as he poured, the deliberate pause before offering the bowl, he sought not just perfection, but absolution. The tea ceremony was a dance of discipline, a ritual where every gesture was a prayer to harmony, to the gods who had spared him, to the earth that had reclaimed the fallen. The steam curled upward, vanishing like the smoke of distant campfires, and for a heartbeat, he was there again amid the chaos, the clash, the dirt beneath his nails. Then the sunlight shifted, glinting off the lacquered tea caddy, and he exhaled, releasing the past with the breath. The bowl passed to the first student, its weight bittersweet in his palms. Here, in this quiet room, he was not a warrior but a vessel of tradition, of stillness, of the fragile peace he had carved from the remnants of war. The clatter of a distant cart over cobblestones, the laughter of children beyond the garden wall, these were the sounds of a world that had moved on. And so, with a final bow, he too let go, if only for this moment, and allowed the ceremony to carry him, like a leaf upon the river, toward the tranquil shore he had spent a lifetime seeking. The air in the tea room was still, fragrant with the clean, grassy scent of matcha and the faint, woody perfume of fresh tatami. A single shaft of morning light slanted through the shoji screen, dust motes dancing in its beam, illuminating the smooth, dark grain of the cedar tray before him. Kenshin's hands hovered just above it, fingers relaxed yet poised hands that had once gripped the worn hilt of a katana with the same deliberate care. He could still feel the ghost of that tension, the way his palms would ache after hours of practice, the sharp, metallic whisper of steel leaving its scabbard, a sound etched into his bones like the hum of cicadas in summer. Now those same hands moved with quiet precision, folding the silk fukusa, the fabric whispering against itself as he cleansed the chowan, each motion a meditation. The past was a shadow at the edge of his awareness, the clash of swords, the coppery tang of blood in the air, the weight of armor pressing into his shoulders. But here, in this moment, there was only the slow, steady rhythm of his breath, the scrape of bamboo against porcelain as he measured the vibrant green powder, the faint, earthy bitterness of the tea already lingering on his tongue. His pulse, once quickened by the drums of war, now matched the unhurried cadence of the kettle's simmering song. A slight tremor touched his fingers, not from fear, but from memory, and he paused, letting the silence settle. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobbled streets echoed like distant waves, a reminder of the world turning, time flowing onward. The curve of the teacup fit perfectly in his palm, its glaze cool and unbroken, a vessel for stillness. He thought of the cherry blossoms outside, petals scattering like fallen warriors, and yet the tree stood, rooted, alive. The tea was ready. He lifted the bowl, feeling the weight of it, not a weapon, not a shield, but an offering. The scent rose like incense, a prayer for peace, for the grace to hold both past and present without flinching. The first sip was bitter, then sweet, and for a heartbeat, the battlefield was far away. The water flowed from the iron kettle in a steady, translucent arc, its stream precise as an archer's bowstring, steam curling into the quiet air. The scent of matcha earthy, bitter mingled with the faint cedar of the tatami mats beneath his knees, their clean, woven fragrance a balm against the weight at the edges of his mind. But as his hands cradled the chowan, fingertips tracing its rough glazed curve, The warmth against his palms bled into another heat. The memory of blood-slicked hilts, of a summer night thick with the iron stench of war. His breath caught, just for half a heartbeat long enough for the ghost of a scream to flicker behind his eyelids. The cry of a man whose name he'd carved into stone at a shrine he could no longer bear to visit. The tremor in his wrists was imperceptible, a fleeting ripple like wind over still water, yet he felt it in his bones. He exhaled slowly, forcing the choked air from his lungs, and watched the steam tremble above the bowl. Outside, the rustle of bamboo leaves against the shoji screen marked time nature's metronome, indifferent to the drumbeats of memory. The water pooled into the cup, impossibly clear, yet reflexively his eyes sought shadows in its depths, faces, the flash of a blade, the way twilight had turned the battlefield into a sea of glinting metal. His fingers tightened only to loosen again as the ritual demanded, as the years of discipline insisted. This, not that. He reminded himself the smooth weight of the tea scoop in his palm, the quiet ritual of folding the silk cloth, the way the light slanted through the window like the kami themselves bowed to witness the ceremony. The war was ink on parchment now. The tea was living. Yet sometimes, in the space between the kettle's hiss and the first sip, he wondered if the tranquility he offered others was only a armor he wore, lacquered as carefully as the wooden trays he polished each dawn. The first guest's geta clattered on the stepping stone outside, a staccato interruption. He lifted the bowl, turning it precisely 2 rotations, a tradition older than the sword scars on his back, and let the bitterness flood his tongue, a reminder that even peace required swallowing sharpness whole. Word count 643. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the shoji screens, painting the tearoom in hues of gold and shadow. The clean scent of sun-warmed tatami mingled with the vegetal sharpness of freshly whisked matcha notes of cut grass and crushed pine needles that whispered of distant mountain temples. Yet beneath these tranquil impressions, beneath the measured rhythm of his own breath, Kenzo felt it still. That taut thread of awareness humming in his veins like the aftermath of a plucked bowstring. His student, young Koji, knelt across from him, brows furrowed as he traced the rim of his empty chowan. "Master," the boy ventured, and the fragile silence shattered like thin lake ice. "Why must we always begin in silence?" Kenzo's fingers, calloused from decades of gripping tanto and tessin, hovered above the lacquered tea caddy, a pause not hesitation, but the fractional stillness of a heron before strike. The question echoed in the space between them, tugging at the edges of memories better left undisturbed. The metallic tang of bloodied snow, the war cries swallowed by winter winds, the terrible beauty of a moonlit blade arcing toward flesh. Even now, his body remembered the tremor in his left palm. That old spear wound from Nake Sendo thrummed faintly as he lifted the chashaku. The bamboo scoop's curve mirroring the crescent moon, over forgotten battlefields. Outside, cherry petals brushed against the eaves with a sound like ghostly footsteps. He filled the silence not with words, but with motion. The deliberate pour of steaming water, the deliberate swirl of the chasen through emerald froth. Every movement a ritual, every breath a sutra. The tea's bitterness bloomed across his tongue, an anchor to this moment, this room, this fragile piece woven between the clatter of geta on cobblestones and the muted song of temple bells. Koji fidgeted. To the young, silence was emptiness. To Kenzo, it was the loom upon which fate's threads revealed their patterns. "Listen," he murmured at last, watching a dust mote spiral in the sunbeam beside Koji's shoulder. "The kettle's sigh is the mountain wind. Your heartbeat is the taiko drum of the gods." His knuckles tightened around the chowan's curve, smooth as a warrior's helmet polished by time. And for an instant, he was 20 again, standing breathless in the wreckage of Kamaki Nagakute, sword dangling from numb fingers as dawn stained the corpses around him crimson. How loudly the dead had screamed in their silence. A sparrow alighted on the engawa. Kenzo exhaled, long and slow, feeling the weight of phantom armor lift with his breath. Here, now, there was only the rustle of silk against tatami as Koji bent forward, only the quiet communion of palms accepting the offered bowl. The steam blurred the scars on Kenzo's hands, just as fog once blurred the fields where he'd fought. But the tea's heat was real, immediate, cleansing as monsoon rain on blood-stained earth. He met the boy's questioning gaze and saw not an answer, but a reflection. The same unrest that had haunted him from battlefield to Terum, the war between the cry of the crow and the chant of the monks. "Silence," Kenzo said, watching the last tendril of steam dissolve into air, "is the space where the tea speaks, where steel forgets its hunger." The words hung between them like incense smoke, fragile yet undeniable. Somewhere beyond the garden, a swordsmith's hammer rang against heated metal, the old song of fire and shaping. But here, in the dimming light, there was only the shared warmth of the bowl, the quiet understanding that some storms could not be outrun, only weathered. Koji's shoulders relaxed by degrees, his breath sinking with the master's. The cherry petals kept falling, each one a whispered promise. Even warriors became earth, even scars softened with time. The samurai's fingers paused above the bamboo ladle, hovering as if suspended between worlds, between the weight of the sword and the weightlessness of tea. The clean, grassy scent of fresh matcha coiled through the air, mingling with the faint musk of sun-warmed tatami beneath his knees. Outside, the wind teased the cherry blossoms into a slow, drifting dance, petals brushing the wooden engawa like whispers against skin. His breath deepened, slow, deliberate, but beneath the stillness, his pulse thrummed the old, familiar rhythm of the battlefield, the creak of armor, the metallic whisper of a katana drawn in the half-light before dawn. The bitterness of the tea on his tongue was not so different from the iron tang of blood. He exhaled softly, letting the memory dissolve like steam from the chowan. "Silence," he murmured, his voice as measured as the turning of the seasons, "is not the absence of sound, but the presence of the mind undisturbed." The words carried the weight of decades of mornings when the only prayer was survival, and evenings when the tea bowl became an altar. His hands, once hardened by the grip of a sword, now cradled the porcelain with reverence, each movement a sutra written in air. The whisk's quiet swirl, the steam curling like mist over a mountain pass, a tremor, faint as a spider's thread, flickered through his fingertips not from age, but from the ghost of a grip tightening around a hilt long since surrendered. The shadows of the tea room stretched, the shifting light through the shoji screens painting the walls with the delicate geometry of passing time. Here, in this ritual of water and leaf, he sought the clarity that had eluded him under the flash of blades the moment when the self vanished, and only the ceremony remained. The clatter of wooden geta on cobblestones drifted in from the street, a distant echo of the world beyond, but within these walls, even the simmering kettle seemed to bow to the silence. He lifted the bowl, feeling the heat seep into his palms, the curve of the ceramic fitting against his skin like the hilt of a blade molded to its master. For a heartbeat, he was torn between the memory of war cries and the sacred hush of the tea room, between the chaos he had wielded and the peace he now cultivated. And then, just as the first sip of tea bridged the bitter and the sweet, he let go. The past was a shadow, the present, a bowl held in two steady hands. The sliding door stood slightly ajar, allowing the evening breeze to drift into the teahouse, carrying with it the fragile scent of cherry, blossoms sweet and ephemeral mingling, with the clean, woody aroma of tatami mats warmed by the low braziers. The retired samurai, now a tea master, knelt before the chabana arrangement, his calloused fingers pausing mid-motion as the wind stirred. Outside, petals fluttered like wisps of pink snow against the shoji screens, their delicate dance, a whisper of monsoon of how swiftly beauty was torn away by time's indifferent hand. The thought was not new to him. It lived in the scar beneath his ribs, in the way his left hand still twitched toward the ghost of a sword hilt when the night was too quiet. He exhaled, slow and deliberate, feeling the air leave his lungs as if he were shedding an old armor. The room seemed to hold its breath with him. The iron kettle hissed softly over the coals, its steam curling like incense toward the beams, while the polished edge of the chowan glowed faintly in the lamplight, smooth as river stone beneath his palm. He lifted the whisk, its bamboo bristles trembling ever so slightly, not with age, but with the memory of tension, of muscles coiled for strikes that no longer came. The scent of matcha rose bitter and green as he poured the water, a ritual that mirrored the discipline of kata, each motion precise, each breath measured. Yet here, stillness was the weapon. The silence between heartbeats stretched like the space between dawn and battle. And for an instant, he was 20 again, standing in the bloody mud of Sekigahara, the metallic tang of the field searing his tongue, the clatter of arrows against armor sharper than any tea scoop scraping ceramic. He blinked. A petal had landed on the tatami, its edges already browning. The wind outside sighed through the pines, and he wondered if the gods watched this small ceremony, if they too longed for the fragile order of human hands, shaping chaos into something fleeting yet perfect. His guest shifted, and the samurai master felt the weight of their expectation, the unspoken desire for the peace he seemed to embody. He ground the tea with circular strokes, the rhythm syncopated with distant temple bells, their deep tones reverberating through the hills like echoes of a far-off gong signaling retreat. The first sip was always the most intimate, the heat seeping into his bones, the bitterness dissolving into sweetness on his tongue, an alchemy that felt like forgiveness. Outside, the last petals fell, dusting the cobbled path where his geta had once trod heavily in another life. The kettle sang a low, steady note, and for now, the war within him quieted, outlasted by the steam, the stillness, the surrender to this single, unbroken moment. The samurai resumes the lesson, his movements becoming more deliberate, as if searching for solace in the ritual. The scent of fresh tatami, dry grass, and sun-warmed earth mingles with the sharp, grassy perfume of matcha, a fragrance so clean it seems to purify the air itself. His knuckles, scarred and calloused from decades gripping a sword, now cradle the chowan with reverence, fingertips tracing the curve of the bowl, as if memorizing its imperfections. The steam curls upward, a fragile spiral dissolving into the dim light filtering through shoji screens. And for a heartbeat, he sees not the tea, but the mist of a long-ago dawn on a battlefield, the breath of his fallen comrades crystallizing in the winter air. He inhales deeply sage and pine from the charcoal, the faint metallic tang of his own blade, oiled and hidden in the alcove, then exhales, slowing the tremor in his left hand before lifting the whisk. The bamboo tines scrape against ceramic in slow, practiced circles, a sound like wind through reeds, like the distant clatter of geta on cobblestones outside, rhythmic but unhurried. Silence stretches, thick as the tea's froth, and in it he feels the weight of his own stillness. The way his spine aligns just so, the press of his knees against the floor, a posture both battle-ready and bowed in prayer. The student across from him mirrors his breath, but the samurai's thoughts drift to the cranes embroidered on his sleeve, wings outstretched, forever mid-flight, and wonders if peace is not the absence of war, but the act of holding both truths at once. The tea darkens, a jade vortex settling into clarity. He rotates the bowl twice, an offering to the gods of harmony, though his marrow still thrums with the memory of storms, the scream of drawn steel, the shudder of parried blows, the way blood dried sticky as syrup on his hakama. Yet here, now, the kettle's song is a lullaby, the clink of the ladle against iron, a shrine bell calling him home. He serves the tea, wrist tilting with the precision of a swordsman's strike. And as the student bows, the samurai lets his eyelids fall shut, just for a moment, listening to the whisper of silk, the drip of lingering droplets in the cusp of the ladle. Each sound a stitch, mending the tear between then and now. The bitterness lingers on his tongue, but beneath it blooms something sweeter. The knowing that every ceremony is a battle won, every breath a surrender to the present, and the hearth smoke curling toward the heavens is incense enough for both warrior and monk. The quiet of the tearoom was thick with the scent of freshly cut tatami, its grassy sweetness mingling with the earthy aroma of matcha, finely ground and waiting. Warm light filtered through the shoji screens, casting a golden lattice over the low wooden table where the student knelt, hands trembling ever so slightly as he poured the water. The samurai, now a master of this tranquil art, watched with eyes that had once tracked the flicker of enemy blades. His stillness honed not just by meditation, but by the old, instinctive discipline of the battlefield. The air was cool against his skin, carrying the distant rustle of maple leaves in the garden, their faint whisper like the sigh of armor being set down after a long march. A single droplet of water clung to the ladle's edge, trembling, then fell with a soft plink into the iron kettle, a sound as precise as the ring of steel being drawn from its saya. The student's breath hitched, his grip faltered, and then it happened. The bowl tipped, the vibrant green tea spilling across the polished wood like a sudden breach in a dam, darkening the grain. The room froze. The student's face paled, his shoulders tensing as if bracing for a blow. The samurai did not move. His own hands, calloused and scarred, rested lightly on his knees, each knuckle a testament to years of gripping swords, of blood slick on a rainy field, of the awful dichotomy between cutting a man down and the sacred act of raising a bowl of tea to the gods. He remembered his own teacher long ago, and the first time he had spilled the tea, how shame had burned his cheeks, how he had flinched, expecting wrath. But the old master had only smiled, serene as a river stone, and said, "The tea is already spilled. Why spill your spirit as well?" Now, decades later, the lesson rose in his chest like steam from the kettle. He inhaled deeply, the bitterness of the matcha lingering in his nostrils, mingling with the faint metallic tang of memory, the smell of rain on armor, of sweat and fear. With deliberate slowness, he reached for a silk cloth, its surface smooth as a dawn untouched by war. "Watch," he murmured, his voice soft but carrying the weight of command. He dabbed the spill, each motion measured, a meditation in itself. The wood drank the tea, the stain blooming like an ink painting, impermanent, yet part of the story. Outside, a breeze stirred the wind chime, its hollow tones ringing like distant temple bells, like the echoes of arrows singing through the air. He had spent years trying to silence those echoes, to replace them with the steady rhythm of the tea whisk. the ritual chant of preparation. But some ghosts lingered in the sinew and bone, in the way his breath still caught sometimes at the sound of thunder, so like the boom of cannon fire. The student exhaled, ragged with relief, and the samurai met his gaze. "A bowl is just a bowl," he said, lifting the empty vessel, its glaze catching the light like a sword's edge. "And tea is just tea, but the moment you share with another soul, that is what the gods taste." He rotated the bowl slightly, revealing a hairline crack barely visible. "See, even this flaw has its beauty. It tells a story." His thumb traced the faint line, a gesture too gentle for fingers that had once twisted a man's kimono to drag him into the killing stroke. The student swallowed, nodding, and the samurai felt something unknot in his own chest. The past was a shadow, but here now the steam curled upward, the tatami breathed, and the world was reduced to this. The weight of a bowl, the warmth of shared silence, the quiet victory in choosing patience over fury. The tea ceremony was not an erasure of the battles he had fought, but a continuation of them, a different kind of discipline, a different kind of harmony. The spilled tea was not a failure, but a lesson. The crack in the bowl, not a weakness, but proof it had survived. And as the student began again, hands steadier now, the samurai allowed himself a small smile, the weight in his heart lighter, if only for this fleeting, perfect moment. The scent of fresh tatami straw mingled with the earthy aroma of matcha. A clean, sharp fragrance that washed over the retired samurai as he knelt in the dimly lit tea room. The morning light filtered through the shoji screens, casting delicate patterns onto the polished wooden floor, each beam a silent witness to the ritual about to unfold. His hands, calloused from decades of gripping a sword, now cradled the chowan with deliberate care, fingertips tracing the curve of the bowl, as if measuring the weight of memory itself. The ceramic was smooth beneath his touch, cool as the morning dew. Yet warmth seeped into his palms as he prepared the tea heat and chill, like the duality of his own soul. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of geta on cobblestones echoed faintly, a distant reminder of the world moving on, while here, in this sacred space, time slowed to the measure of his breath. He inhaled deeply, the air crisp with the lingering dampness of dawn, and for a moment, the scent of cherry blossoms from the garden beyond trickled in, sweet and fleeting. But then there it was, unbidden, the phantom tang of iron, the memory of blood on rain-soaked earth, the echoing screams of battle that still whispered in his dreams. His fingers trembled ever so slightly, a tremor no one else would notice, and he paused, allowing the stillness to settle him. His master's voice echoed in his mind, soft yet unshakable. The ceremony is not about perfection, but presence. Each movement, each breath, is a dialogue with the universe. The words unfolded in his chest like a lotus, petals of wisdom parting the shadows. He exhaled, long and slow. And as the steam rose from the whisked tea, twisting like incense toward the heavens, He imagined it carrying his regrets upward to the gods, to his fallen comrades, to the endless cycle of seasons that had borne witness to both war and peace. The tea's bitter taste bloomed on his tongue, a familiar sting, yet beneath it lay a subtle sweetness, the promise of stillness earned. The bowl, once a vessel for chaos in another life, now held only tranquility, a mirror of the discipline he had forged in fire and tempered in silence. Outside, a breeze stirred the bamboo, its hollow chime a reminder that even the strongest must bend. And for the first time that morning, his heartbeat aligned with the rhythm of the ritual, each motion flowing into the next, as inevitable as the turning of the earth. The battlefield's echoes did not vanish, they never would, but here, in this moment, they were merely notes in a larger harmony, threads woven into the tapestry of a life that had learned to hold both sword and tea with equal reverence. The steam rose from the chowan in a delicate curl, carrying the clean, grassy scent of matcha, mingling with the faint fragrance of fresh tatami beneath his knees. Straw and sun and silence. The samurai's hands, calloused from decades gripping a sword, now cradled the bowl with a reverence that still surprised him. The polished lacquer was cool against his fingertips, smooth as the silk of his kimono, yet his palms remembered the rough leather wrap of a katana's hilt, the way his fingers had once tightened before the first cut. Outside, the soft clatter of wooden geta on cobbled streets echoed like distant drums, a rhythm that could have been marching orders in another life. He inhaled slowly, the air thick with the incense of a losewood, its sweetness a fragile veil over the metallic tang of memory blood on snow, the rasp of steel leaving its sheath. A sound so sharp it had once split the world into before and after. But here, now, the only blade was the bamboo whisk in his palm, its fine tines swirling the tea into froth like river foam over stone. His breath caught, just for a heartbeat, as the light through the shoji screens shifted, painting the tearoom in gold-dusted shadows. And for a moment, he was not in this quiet chamber, but under the cherry blossoms at Shimabara, where the petals had fallen like snowflakes onto blood-stained ground. The weight of it pressed against his ribs the faces of the fallen, the unasked question if their spirits had found the peace he still sought. But then the bowl warmed his hands, grounding him, and he lifted it with both palms, feeling the heat seep into his skin like an offering. The first sip was bitter, as all truths were, but beneath it lay something softer, a tenderness that uncoiled the knot in his chest. The tea's jade surface trembled with his exhale, and he watched, motionless, as the ripples stilled. The room held its breath with him. The past was a warrior's armor, but it was heavy. Here, in the measured silence between sips, he could unfasten it, piece by piece. The cedar beams overhead, weathered by centuries, whispered of temples and timeless things, and the wind, sighing through the garden's pines, carried not the screams of battle, but the murmur of leaves against stone. For this one perfect moment, the ceremony was his battlefield and his sanctuary, every movement a sutra, every breath a surrender. And when he set the bowl down, the weight that remained was lighter, not gone, but softened, like dawn easing the grip of night. The morning sunlight filtered through the paper shoji screens, casting delicate patterns on the tatami mats, their clean, grassy scent mingling with the earthy aroma of freshly prepared matcha. The retired samurai, now a tea master, knelt with practiced ease, his hands steady as he measured the vibrant green powder, each motion precise, each breath measured. Yet beneath the silk of his kimono, his heart carried the weight of old battles, the phantom sting of sword cuts, and the acrid smell of smoke from burning villages, the serene rhythm of the tea ceremony, the soft hiss of boiling water, the smooth glide of the chasen through the bowl almost drowned out the sharper echoes in his soul. The whisper of a katana drawn in the dead of night, the choked silence before a killing strike. He paused, fingers hovering over the polished wood of the tea caddy, sensing the tremble there, so slight only he could feel it. Outside, the distant clatter of geta on cobblestones marked the passage of time, of lives moving forward while his own remained tethered to moments he could not undo. As he lifted the bowl to his student, a young man, whose eagerness reminded him of his own youth, the steam curled upward, carrying the bittersweet taste of memories both cherished and agonizing. The first sip of tea was always an awakening, bitterness, then warmth, then quiet clarity. It was a ritual of forgiveness, a communion with the present, yet the past lingered like the aftertaste on his tongue. He thought of cherry blossoms, their fleeting beauty a reminder of life's fragility, and of the way blood had once bloomed just as vividly on snow. But here, in this quiet room, the stillness was a balm. The shift of light across the floor marked the sun's slow ascent, and for a moment, he felt the gods themselves watching, their presence as palpable as the wind brushing against the eaves. His student, wide-eyed with reverence, hesitated before drinking, as if afraid to break the spell. The tea master watched him, seeing not just a disciple, but a bridge between the man he had been and the man he was becoming. And then unexpected, unbidden, a smile touched his lips. It was a rare thing, slight but true, like the first green shoot pushing through winter-hardened earth. In that instant, the weight in his chest lightened, not gone but softened, as if the act of passing on this peace had granted him a share of it too. The battlefield's echoes would never fully fade, but here, in the shared silence between sips, in the steam that rose like an offering to the heavens, he found something like absolution. The tea bowl, empty now, gleamed in the light a vessel of stillness, a promise of moments yet to be savored. The final sip of tea is taken in silence, the moment stretching like the horizon at dawn. The bowl, cradled in his weathered hands, is emptied of its bitter green warmth, leaving only the ghost of steam rising into the still air. Around him, the clean scent of fresh tatami mingles with the faint, earthy perfume of powdered matcha, a fragrance that always carries him back not to the battlefield, though the memory lurks like a shadow at the edge of his vision. But to the first time, he understood the ceremony as something more than ritual, as a fleeting grasp of the divine. The room breathes with him, the shoji screens softening the daylight into honeyed gold, the silence so complete he can hear the distant rustle of wind through the garden's maple leaves. Yet beneath it all, there is another sound, or the memory of one, the sharp, lethal whisper of a katana drawn in the dead of night. A sound his body still tenses at, even now, even here. He exhales, long and slow, feeling the tremor in his fingers as he lowers the bowl to the polished wooden tray, the wood cool and smooth as river stone beneath his touch. The perfect silence is fragile, and he knows it. It is the same silence that existed between strikes in combat, the heartbeat before chaos. But this is different. Here, the pause is sacred. Here, the breath is a prayer. He gazes at the empty bowl, its glaze catching the light like morning on still water. And for an instant, he is not a retired warrior, but merely a man kneeling at the altar of transience, where every movement is measured, and every moment is both an ending and a beginning. The clatter of geta on cobbled streets filters in from beyond the garden, a reminder of the world continuing outside this suspended hour. But within these walls, time is a slow-flowing river. He thinks of the way the tea leaves settle at the bottom of the bowl, like fallen soldiers sinking into earth after rain. And he wonders if this ceremony, this art of presence, is his penance or his absolution. The air cools as the sun shifts, the shadows deepening along the seams of the tatami, stitching the room into quietude. He closes his eyes. Somewhere, a temple bell tolls, its resonance humming through the bones of the city, through the bones of his history. When he opens them again, the light has changed. The ceremony is over. The world awaits. And yet, in the space between breaths, he carries this stillness with him like a blade sheathed, like a promise unbroken. The student bows deeply, his forehead almost touching the sun-warmed tatami, the faint, clean scent of straw mingling with the earthy aroma of freshly whisked matcha. The tea master observes the gesture, his own hands resting lightly on his thighs, fingers curled with the ghost of old calluses, reminders of a grip that once trembled not with age, but with the fierce anticipation of battle. The room is quiet, save for the distant cry of a lone cicada outside the shoji screens, its song like the drawn-out ring of steel against steel, a sound that still flickers at the edges of the master's mind. Even after all these years, the student exhales, and the air between them shifts, carrying the faintest hint of pine resin from the charcoal glowing in the hearth, a smell that once meant campfires under battlements, restless nights before the clash of armies. The master breathes in, slow and deliberate, feeling the weight of his ribs expanding, the scar beneath his kimono pulling tight, an old wound that aches when the rains come, or when the silence stretches too long. His fingers trace the curve of the chowan, its glaze cool and smooth, a perfect contrast to the roughness of his past. He remembers the heft of a sword, the way the dawn light would catch the edge before the first strike, how the world narrowed to the space between breaths, just as it does now, in the ritual's measured pace. The student lifts his head, eyes reflecting the soft glow of the brazier. And for a moment, the master sees not his face, but the faces of men long gone comrades who fell with their backs to the sun, their last breaths misting in the morning air like steam from a teacup. The thought tightens his throat, but he does not flinch. Instead, he reaches for the whisk, the rhythmic swirl of bamboo against ceramic, a counterpoint to the distant memory of hooves on cobblestones, the clatter of geta fleeing the march of armies. The tea froths, a pale green whirlpool, and in its center, the master finds stillness, not the absence of war, but the presence of something deeper, older. The gods, he thinks, must drink from such cups, bitter, fleeting, perfect. The offering is ready. His hands, steady now, present the bowl to the student, whose bowed figure is a mirror of devotion, of seeking. The master wonders if he, too, once knelt like this, aching for a peace that no sword could cut through. The first sip is always the most telling, the way the lips part. The hesitation before the bitterness blooms on the tongue. The student drinks, and the master watches the moment unfold, the furrow of his brow smoothing, his shoulders settling like the last leaves of autumn yielding to winter's approach. Outside, the wind stirs the maple branches, their rustling a whispered echo of the countless souls who have bowed, fought, and faded. The master closes his eyes. Here, in this fragile ritual, there is no victory, no defeat, only the act itself, unbroken, like the cycle of the moon, like the dust motes dancing in a sunbeam, endlessly falling and rising. The tea is gone, the bowl is empty, the lesson perhaps has begun. Alone again, in the quiet of his tea house, the samurai knelt before the open shoji doors, watching as the last light of dusk gilded the cherry blossoms outside. The petals, delicate as a sigh, trembled in the evening breeze, their pale pink silk catching the fading sun like embers of a dying fire. Once they had been harbingers of loss, each falling bloom a fleeting echo of comrades who had fallen like petals in the wind, their blood staining the earth as briefly as spring's fragile beauty. But now, as the scent of fresh matcha curled through the air, clean, grassy, with an edge of bitter earth, he found solace in their transience. The blossoms were not a farewell, but a reminder. Life, too, was a ceremony, each moment measured and precious. The tatami beneath his knees released the faint, sun-warmed aroma of straw, mingling with the pine resin of the wooden beams overhead. The scents layered like the years of his life, war and stillness, chaos and order. A distant temple bell tolled, its deep resonance vibrating through the stillness. And for a breath, he was not a retired warrior, not a tea master, but simply a man suspended between memory and the present, his hands, calloused from decades, gripping a sword, now cradled the chowan with deliberate care. The smooth curve of the ceramic fitting against his palms like a second skin, the tea whisk's soft scrape against the bowl, was a sound as precise as the whisper of a katana, drawn from its saya, one a prelude to creation, the other to destruction. He still remembered the weight of the blade, the way his pulse would steady before battle, time contracting to a single, crystalline moment. Here, too, the world narrowed to the steam rising from the bowl, the slow inhale that carried its scent deep into his lungs, the way his breath hitched when the past crept in unbidden, the screams of horses, the metallic tang of blood, the way the cherry trees had bloomed the spring he left for his last campaign. But the tea demanded presence. He lifted the bowl, fingers curling just so, the heat seeping into his skin as he took the first bitter sip. The taste was an anchor, the ritual a sutra written in motion, each gesture a prayer to stillness. Outside, a single petal drifted onto the veranda, and he watched it, his chest tightening with something akin to gratitude. The gods, if they listened, spoke in such moments, not in the clamor of battle, but in the hush of steam, the rustle of silk as he adjusted his sleeves, the way the light shifted as the sun dipped below the eaves, painting the blossoms in shadow. The war was over, the tea was here, and for now that was enough. The how to conjugate past conditional in French, to conjugate the past conditional in French. You need to understand its structure and the components involved. The past conditional is formed using the conditional tense of the auxiliary verbs avoir or erter, followed by the past participle of the main verb. Here's how you can conjugate it. 1. Identify the auxiliary verb. Most French verbs use avoir as their auxiliary. How to conjugate conditional tense in French to conjugate the conditional tense in French. You typically take the infinitive form of the verb and add the appropriate endings. For regular and verbs, the endings are eyes, ate, ions, ease, and. For regular verbs, you drop the before adding these endings. However, there are some irregular stems for certain verbs, similar to the future tense. Here, composition of French auxiliary verbs in French auxiliary verbs, known as verbs auxiliaires, primarily include avoir, to have, and erter, to be. These verbs are fundamental in forming compound tenses, such as the passé composé, where they conjugate according to the subject and tense, followed by the past participle of the main verb. Additionally, aller, to go, can function as a semi-auxiliary verb to form the near future tense, futur proche. Understanding the conjugation and usage of these auxiliary, the night settled over the tea house like a fine silk veil, the air cool and damp, with the lingering kiss of evening rain. The scent of freshly woven tatami mats, straw and earth mingling with the clean, green bitterness of matcha whisked to perfection, filled the room, a sanctuary carved from silence. Outside, the rhythmic clatter of wooden geta on cobbled streets echoed faintly. a distant counterpoint to the chirping of crickets, weaving their lullaby through the darkness. A lone lantern flickered, casting shifting shadows on the polished cedar beams, its light trembling just slightly, like the old samurai's hands as he measured the powdered tea. His breath slowed, deliberate, as if each inhalation could steady the weight in his chest, the ever-present echo of steel ringing against steel. The screams of men and horses lost to time. The tea bowl, smooth and cool beneath his fingers, bore the scars of its own history, tiny imperfections that spoke of fires endured, just as the scars beneath his robes spoke of battles survived. He poured the water in a thin, deliberate stream, watching the steam curl upward like the smoke of campfires from another life. The scent bloomed, sharp and vegetal, cutting through his thoughts, but not deeply enough to banish the memory of iron and sweat. The way the air had tasted before a charge, thick with fear and anticipation. The whisk moved in his hand, a quick, practiced motion, a dance of discipline. Yet for all its grace, he could still feel the ghost of a katana's hilt in his palm, the way his fingers had tensed before striking, the stillness of a breath held before bloodshed. His jaw tightened imperceptibly. Was this now this quiet, this ritual enough to balance the scales? A single sip, bitter and bright, jolted him back. The taste was pure, unyielding, a reminder of the mountain monks who had first taught him that tea and Zen were one, that every motion was a prayer. Beyond the open shoji, the wind stirred the maple leaves, their rustle a whisper of seasons turning, of the world's endless cycles, war and peace, life and death, the rise and fall of empires, all distilled into this moment, this bowl. The laughter of a passing group softened in the distance, fleeting, like the joy he had once known beneath cherry blossoms before the call to duty had come. He let it fade, focusing instead on the cup's weight, the way it warmed his palms as he turned it, a single, perfect rotation to honor his guest who would never arrive, the part of himself still standing on that battlefield, sword in hand. The candlelight flickered again, and for a heartbeat, the shadows danced like specters at the edge of vision. He exhaled, long and slow, and the ghosts withdrew. The tea was ready. The night deepened, and for now, at least, there was only the quiet, the steam, the path of a single leaf settling at the bottom of the bowl, proof, perhaps, that even the most restless soul could find stillness, if only for the span of a drink. The last embers of daylight faded beyond the shoji screens, painting the room in soft, bruised purples as the retired samurai knelt upon the tatami, its woven reeds releasing the faint, sun-warmed scent of summer grass beneath him. The tea bowl, cradled in his palms like a fledgling bird, still carried the ghost of bitter matcha, earthy and bright, a taste that lingered like the memory of steel. Outside, the wind whispered through the bamboo grove, its hushed rustle blending with the distant murmur of the town, settling into evening. The rhythmic click of wooden geta on cobblestones fading, as lanterns were lit one by one. He exhaled slowly, shoulders easing, though the weight of his past clung to him like an unseen shadow. The ritual had been flawless today, each movement precise, each pause deliberate, yet the tremor in his fingers, as he'd folded the silk fukusa, had betrayed him. A fleeting echo of the adrenaline that once coursed through his veins before battle. The scent of rain on the horizon mingled with the incense smoke curling lazily toward the ceiling. And for a breath, he was back on the mist-shrouded battlefield, the metallic tang of blood thick in the air, the cries of men swallowed by the drumming downpour. But then the kettle sighed on the hearth, a gentle, living sound, and the present reclaimed him. The polished wood of the chashaku rested against his palm, smooth as the hilt of his katana had been, yet bearing no hunger for conflict, only the quiet duty of measure and grace. Moonlight spilled across the floor like spilled silver, illuminating the scroll in the alcove. A single brushstroke of ink, a crane in flight, forever poised between earth and sky. He knew, as sleep drew near, that this was the balance he had sought, not the severing of his past, but the weaving of its threads into something softer, something worthy of the peace he had helped shape. The tea bowl, now empty, held only the faintest ring of where the whisk had danced, a transient mark, like the footsteps of a warrior who had learned to walk without leaving scars. And as the night deepened, the wind carried the fragrance of plum blossoms through the open window, sweet and fleeting, a reminder that even the most hardened soul could still bend toward light.